Johnny Carson's top favorite celebrities. Beneath the easy charm and friendly smile that welcomed America every night for 3 decades, there were assessments as scathing as any joke Johnny Carson ever told. The guy who could make or break careers with a nod or a shrug, television's undeniable late-night king, kept up a carefully manicured public persona of friendly affability while privately harboring resentments that influenced late-night television for decades. Johnny maintained an unbreakable mental blacklist that he had long since disclosed to staffer. You were never, and I mean never, able to win back his favor once you were on it. Most viewers wouldn't even be aware that he was slashing you to shreds while flashing that iconic smile. Why are these discoveries so intriguing? Is not only their content, but also how well Carson managed to hide these emotions throughout his historic run. On camera, he was the epitome of professionalism, rarely letting personal issues overshadow his performances. However, these personal grievances affect comedy targets, booking choices, and ultimately the whole entertainment industry in the United States. Get ready to see the raw truth behind the most powerful throne on television. Millions of people saw thousands of programs, and they never suspected the true disdain that simmered behind Carson's signature charm. The feuds were so intense that they stayed concealed in plain sight. First, the unforgivable sin was done by Joan Rivers, the protege. Joan Rivers was the target of Johnny Carson's most vehement professional resentment, which was so intense that it went beyond simple disappointment to become what Carson himself referred to in private as the greatest betrayal of my professional life. A senior NBC executive from that era clarified that this was more than just a falling out. Shakespearean, this mentor-protege connection collapsed so thoroughly that it changed the late-night scene forever. When Carson saw Rivers laboring in comedy clubs in the 1960s, he became her defender, frequently bringing her on The Tonight Show and finally appointing her as his permanent guest host, a role of unparalleled prominence and power. Rivers became so strongly identified with the show that many saw her as Carson's logical successor by the early 1980s, when she had guest hosted more than 100 episodes. When Fox offered Rivers her own rival late-night program in 1987, it caused a heartbreaking breakup. Several reports claim that Rivers' failure to personally notify Carson prior to the news breaking was what turned a possible career change into a lifetime rivalry, not the competition itself. According to Carson's veteran producer Fred de Cordova, Johnny found out about it from Fox executives rather than Joan. He believed that, after everything he had done for her career, that was not only unprofessional, but also a personal betrayal that exposed her actual nature. Carson answered quickly and categorically. Not only was Rivers immediately prohibited from guest hosting, but he was also prohibited from making any appearances on The Tonight Show. Carson privately insisted that this clause be kept in his contract, and it persisted long after Rivers' retirement until Jimmy Fallon took over the show in 2014, years after both Rivers and Carson had passed away. Rivers' public assertion that she had attempted to contact Carson prior to the announcement was what exacerbated the dispute. She did, in fact, call his office according to phone records, but only a few hours before the Fox press conference, when Carson was unavailable due to a flight. Carson saw this last-minute effort as premeditated plausible deniability rather than good faith. She waited until she realized I couldn't be reached, she told me. Then she might say, I tried, recalling Joanne, Carson's second wife. For a moment, Johnny didn't believe it. She had weeks to tell me personally if she truly wanted to, he remarked. When Rivers' late-night show flopped disastrously and her husband Edgar Rosenberg filed a lawsuit, it was the last straw in their separation. Many industry insiders anticipated that Carson, who is known for his private generosity despite his public restraint, would reach out during this personal tragedy. The depth of his sense of betrayal was evident in his silence. I feel terrible about Edgar, but Joan made her choice, he said to his inner circle, revealing a close friend of Carson's. Not even a degree of thawing occurred in the ice. Comedy as a whole suffered long-term effects from their mutual hostility. Because to Carson's support, Rivers was able to become the most well-known female comic in America, but she was essentially banished from mainstream television for years. Became notably more cautious when it came to elevating possible successors, which led to the disjointed late-night scene that developed following his retirement. Throughout her latter years, Rivers kept in touch with Carson, occasionally sending letters that went unanswered. Following his passing in 2005, she said to an interviewer that Carson's friendly grin belied his harsh personality, which made him the most adored celebrity on television. 2. Newton, Wayne. The rivalry that became dangerous in Las Vegas. Johnny Carson's strong dislike of Wayne Newton is one of the few times that his personal grievances have been made public, leading to threats of physical harm that demonstrate how severe Carson's personal grievances can get. This was more than just a professional aversion. According to a longtime Carson associate, this became really frightening. Was the closest Johnny has ever been to a real-life altercation with another famous person. When Carson started making jokes about Newton's purportedly effeminate persona in his monologues in the early 1980s, their feud began. When Newton took the unprecedented step of directly confronting Carson, first through middlemen and then in person at NBC Burbank Studios, what might have remained ordinary celebrity ribbing, something Carson performed to innumerable stars, became more intense. According to a Tonight Show crew member, Wayne unexpectedly barged into the studio in between tapings, warned Johnny that these jokes had to end right away since they were hurting his Vegas career. Johnny essentially warned him that comedy doesn't take requests because he didn't react well to demands from anyone. When Newton, a well-known gun aficionado with ties to the security of a Vegas casino, allegedly made remarks that Carson interpreted as vague threats, things quickly got out of hand. Several reports claim that Newton advised Carson to keep an eye on himself if he ever performed in Las Vegas because mishaps occur frequently in the desert. Carson's answer showed the steel below his friendly facade. Instead of retreating, he added new aspects and increased the frequency of jokes about Newton that made fun of his financial troubles and suspected ties to the mob. According to reports, Carson's response to NBC executives' worries about possible backlash demonstrated his readiness to use his position as a weapon if he felt personally threatened. In contrast to the most of his private conflicts, Carson's comprehension of his own authority was made evident during the Newton conflict. He was aware that any physical altercation would be considerably less damaging than the millions of viewers laughing at Newton every night. According to a former Tonight Show writer, Johnny told his writers to keep coming until he apologized. For him, it was a question of principle. The jokes he could or could not say on his own show were not going to be dictated to him. In the end, the conflict subsided due to mutual professional necessity rather than reconciliation. Newton ceased openly reacting to the joke after realizing the harm it was doing to his reputation. After making his point regarding who actually had the power in this dynamic, Carson progressively decreased the Newton material's frequency. They never got back together, and Newton later claimed in his autobiography that Carson's resentment was due to jealousy of Newton's success in Las Vegas. According to reports, when Carson read this, he laughed aloud. "Now that's funny," said Johnny. "At last, Wayne cracked a decent joke," recalling Henry Bushkin, Carson's attorney. Their disagreement serves as a unique illustration of Carson's readiness to publicly air his personal complaints, which speaks to both his generally tactful handling of interpersonal disputes and how seriously he took his sense of basic professional autonomy when it was threatened. CEO Fred Silverman demonstrating how Carson's personal grievances might change the network's same leadership that catapulted him to fame. This was more than a personality dispute. According to a former NBC board member, it was a deliberate effort to fire someone Johnny believed threatened the integrity of his program. The fact that so few outside the executive suite even knew it was taking place is what's so amazing. After successful stints at CBS and ABC, Silverman became president of NBC in 1978, bringing his reputation as a programming genius to the faltering network, which caused their dispute. The partnership appeared good at first, with Silverman showing Carson the respect that the greatest performer on the network deserves. In order to compete with new competitors, Silverman started proposing format modifications to The Tonight Show, such as shorter interviews and more comic bits. This made the issue worse. An old NBC executive said that Johnny considered the show his own territory. Carson viewed Silverman's memos on segment timing and interviewing methods as both a personal slight and a professional overreach. "I've been doing this successfully for 16 years, so who the hell are you to tell me how to do my job?" was his basic attitude. Carson often avoids direct conflict, so instead of going straight after Silverman, he used his unmatched platform to launch a subtle but destructive campaign. Even while Carson never specifically mentioned Silverman in his monologues, industry insiders could not help but notice the increasingly explicit allusions to NBC poor ratings and poor programming choices night after night. Johnny was a clever psychologist who would say things like RCA executives, making it apparent that if Silverman continued to be in charge, his next contract negotiation would be difficult. An RCA board member indicated that Johnny never gave a clear ultimatum. He was not required to. You don't need a formal threat to understand when the biggest celebrity on television begins to hint that he could be happier somewhere else. The plan turned out to be disastrously successful, with Carson's late-night supremacy remaining uncontested and NBC primetime ratings continuing to struggle. The disparity produced a clear narrative about the root of the network's issues. Silverman left under pressure in 1981 because his job was no longer viable, a decision that industry insiders largely attributed to Carson's covert effort. This confrontation is especially instructive because it showed Carson's awareness of his own strength and his readiness to use it when he felt his area was in danger. In contrast to the majority of celebrities who ended up on Carson's bad side, Silverman possessed institutional authority, but found that in the particular power structure of television, Carson's influence ultimately outweighed the network's own head of state. Never openly admitted his responsibility in the executive's demise after Silverman left. Years later, when questioned about their relationship, he only responded with a deflecting quip and his trademark smile. "Who is Fred? With names, I'm awful." The way he handled his most significant professional dislikes was aptly captured by this characteristic Carsonian reaction, which used comedy to cover up true hostility. 4. Frank Sinatra, the confrontation between heavyweights of show industry. One of Hollywood's most significant yet well-kept rivalries is the long-running Cold War between Frank Sinatra and Johnny Carpenter. A rivalry between titans of entertainment that showed not only personality clashes but also underlying disagreements over professional behavior and celebrity power. According to a seasoned NBC executive, this was more than just two well-known celebrities not getting along. This was a conflict between radically divergent ideas about the nature of celebrity and entertainment. When Sinatra made his first Tonight Show appearance following Carson's takeover as host in 1962, their disagreement began. Several accounts claim that Sinatra, who was used to having complete control over his public appearances, came prepared with a list of pre-approved questions and subjects, which was standard procedure back when Jack Paar was in charge. Carson firmly but courteously refused to follow Sinatra's stated strategy, preferring to have impromptu conversations over prearranged ones. A Tonight Show producer was present for the conversation. Johnny informed him. Sinatra was taken aback. Back then, no one refused him. Where? After the interview, which was notably tense, Sinatra assured his fans, "I'm never doing his show again." For almost 10 years, he fulfilled that pledge. Their essentially divergent views on celebrity were what turned professional conflict into personal hostility. Sinatra spoke for traditional Hollywood, which demanded respect, limiting access and assuming that everything will suit his taste. Carson exemplified a more recent, democratic method, treating every visitor equally regardless of their social standing, and holding that spontaneity brought out more genuine moments, rather than meticulous image control. According to a close buddy, Frank thought Johnny's strategy was disrespectful to celebrities who had merited preferential treatment. Frank's demands and Johnny's opinion were an entitlement that hindered open communication. Neither man was prepared to accept the viewpoint of the other. The fact that Sinatra, one of America's most famous entertainers, was glaringly absent from television's most important talk show during the 1960s and early 1970s made their standoff one of the most noticeable absences in late-night television history. When Sinatra, marketing a return special, realized Carson's platform had grown too significant to ignore in 1976, the deadlock ultimately ended. There were restrictions on even this reconciliation. In order to guarantee that no rival performers would take center stage, Sinatra demanded clearance of the episode's guest list before consenting to appear. Despite their personal hatred, Carson, who is often rigid about keeping control of his program, reluctantly made this one concession, a rare professional compromise that showed he recognized Sinatra's cultural significance. One staff writer compared it to a summit between nuclear nations. Through middlemen, every detail was negotiated. Although they were friendly on air, viewers could sense the tension between them. There was no affection between these two individuals. Because of the situation, these two professionals were conducting business. They continued to loathe each other until 1992, when Carson retired. Sinatra returned to The Tonight Show despite numerous chances to make more appearances. Only again, during Carson's last week, when the public would have seen it as petty to turn down the request. Observers observed that even at that point, their exchange was still sternly official rather than truly friendly. This long-standing hostility is especially noteworthy because of its impact on the entertainment industry as a whole. A more egalitarian approach to celebrity interviews was established by Carson's unwillingness to comply with Sinatra's demands for preferential treatment, and this approach still has an impact on talk shows today. Sinatra's opposition to Carson's format, however, was the final vestige of an earlier star system in which the parameters of engagement were set by the superstar rather than the host. Ultimately, Carson's strategy won out by a wide margin, establishing the model for contemporary talk shows when even the biggest celebrities realize they have to have somewhat unscripted conversations. Although neither man ever publicly acknowledged it, their rivalry ultimately contributed to a transformation of the dynamic between talk show presenters, audiences, and celebrities that still shapes entertainment today. In private, Carson hated the comedic icon Bob Hope. Perhaps the most unexpected of Johnny Carson's professional resentments was his strong distaste for Bob Hope, which even Carson's closest colleagues found shocking considering Hope's renowned position in American comedy and his track record of coaching up-and-coming actors. Wasn't widely known, but Raymond Siller, Carson's longtime chief writer, disclosed that Johnny couldn't stand Hope at all. Was the unspoken issue whenever Hope was scheduled to appear on the show. Except for the viewers at home, every employee was aware of it. Their disagreement stemmed from what Carson perceived as Hope's essentially inauthentic approach to comedy and TV appearances, rather than any particular event. Regardless of Carson's inquiries, Hope would show up with prepared jokes and scripted anecdotes, according to several Tonight Show reports, resulting in conversations that felt planned rather than natural. Carson views talk show dynamics as a cardinal sin. According to a Tonight Show producer, genuine conversation was the most important thing to Johnny. But no matter what Johnny asked, Hope would basically give a monologue. Regardless of the actual discourse, he would carry index cards filled with jokes penned by his staff of writers and plow through them mechanically. It was considered rude to the audience by John. As Hope grew older and his appearances became more predictable, Carson found the situation to be more and more frustrating. By the 1980s, Hope's appearances on The Tonight Show had become a predictable routine. She would arrive to roaring applause, strike up a conversation with Carson, and then dive right into prepared material about his golf game, his NBC specials, and his USO tours, frequently reciting jokes and anecdotes from past appearances almost word for word. According to a production assistant, Johnny would go back to his office after very difficult Hope segments and just blow out. I'm not hearing from him. He's reading to me. It's a performance, he would explain, not a conversation. That isn't the purpose of this show. Hope's position as an American icon and NBC institution made this hostility especially difficult. Despite Carson's sentiments, Hope was practically unbookable as the network's longest-serving star and a true national treasure because of his decades of entertaining troops. As a result, Carson found himself in the unenviable position of constantly welcoming and acting as though he enjoyed a visitor who he secretly believed to be the opposite of excellent television. Carson came up with a rather nuanced solution. In order to allow Carson to swiftly switch to guests he truly enjoyed interviewing after the first commercial break, he gradually decreased the frequency of Hope's appearances and scheduled them in ways that minimized their interaction, frequently in the show's first segment. However, he never refused to book Hope or displayed any on-air indication of his true feelings. A camera operator observed that Johnny had mastered this trick of grinning widely without actually interacting. We learn more about the complicated personality of a man whose public friendliness coexisted with private steel as we consider these fabled feuds, in addition to the secret history of television. Like his interviews, Johnny Carson's dislikes were never lighthearted or theatrical. These were manifestations of a character that demanded complete devotion to the principles he held dear, ought to regulate personal behavior as well as entertainment. If you thought this examination of the underlying tensions in television was insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more insights into the meticulously crafted facades of entertainment history. Please share in the comments which revelations caught you off guard or which additional TV icons you would like us to look into in upcoming videos. Until the next time, keep in mind that the most gripping television dramas frequently take place behind the scenes rather than on screen. And occasionally being aware of the personal struggles of our cultural heroes makes us value the genuine moments they produced that still amuse us now.